and when. So when designing your own research, when analyzing other research methods, and please take some examples. If you can bring some examples, will be great.
So Annalisa, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation to this workshop and to this roundtable. It's an honor. So let me ask you if I can share my screen, because I don't know whether I have, yes, I can. Okay, thanks a lot. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay, you can see my slides. Or not?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay, just a second. Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So let me thank you for inviting me to participate to this roundtable. Let me also say that I come from a very different domain. So as Annalisa just mentioned, so some topics that have been discussed today, I found them very interesting, are very also far from my research. And so I hope that so I can somehow contribute with my presentation to this roundtable. But for sure, I will learn a lot, and I can bring some insights and awareness in my research. So let me start by introducing a little bit the methodology that I use, because I think that maybe some of the participants to this workshop do not know much about agent-based modeling. And I would like, I think, to address the question that Annalisa asked me through a slightly different angle. So when I was preparing for this roundtable, I came across the concept of interface method that has been introduced by Professor Marres, and I found it, so for me it was new, and I found it very interesting. So what I wanted to try as a first, let's say, also part of this discussion, this roundtable, is to test with you the idea that agent-based modeling can work as, let's say, an interface method that act between, let's say, approaches that are more based on theories, that, for example, can be a mechanism-oriented explanatory approach, as I will try to discuss, and more descriptive approaches, such as the ones that are instead represented by the computational social sciences. So I would like to discuss this idea of agent-based modeling acting as an interface method. So, as I will discuss in a minute, agent-based model allows to specify and formalize a theory and provide a sufficient explanation about the mechanism that may generate the phenomenon that is under study. And this explanation is typically not provided by the computational social sciences, that instead tend to infer the cause from observed covariations. And one of the effects of this is that it's then difficult to understand how to generalize the results and to apply these results to other domains. So let me just provide a very short introduction to agent-based modeling. So is a research method that is now quite well known and adopted in the social sciences, that started flourishing in the 90s. It's a powerful approach to study complex social phenomena, because it allows researchers to create computer models of our society and then to do virtual experiments on these models to see what could happen. So these computer models are somehow similar to virtual games, because they have agents that can be different from each other, so they can be heterogeneous, they can do things in a virtual world, except that as modelers, we design these models to be typically useful rather than fun. So one example, this is a snapshot from an agent-based model that we recently conducted. But what I want to say is that they can, these simulated words can represent about anything. So they can, for example, represent a stock market, but also a city, as in this case. So the word typically should include then the interesting factors. So if you want to represent the city, you want to include, for example, the size of the city, you want to include some spot of socialization, you may also want to include the weather. And then the city is populated by agents with different features, and this is important, that can be age, gender, employment status. These agents interact together in a shared environment for a certain amount of time. And this point I think is important. So the environment, the features of the agents, and the rules of interactions, they need to be specified by the modeler, by the developer, based on theories that are, of course, are relevant for the phenomenon under study, and also based on data, empirical data. So, and these models can also be created through participatory modeling. So with the help of domain experts, that was also something that Professor Marres was discussing before, this participatory modeling. So this is crucial because if we want to create models that somehow can have some sense for understanding the real world, it's important to ground these models on theory and on data. Just to briefly conclude this point, I would like to stress some advantages of agent-based modeling. These are virtual worlds that make possible to study phenomena that can be difficult in reality. For example, they can allow to study phenomena that happen in the shadow, like criminal activities, but also many other phenomena, of course. They also are sort of experimental in silico laboratories where theories get specified and formalized, but also where it's possible to test the short and long-term impact of interventions. And this can be done before deployment, and this way can be done without harming individuals' rights and freedoms. So this point I think is important. And let me conclude with another feature that I think is important. They also allow to distinguish between the micro level and the macro level, because it's a multi-level world where the level of the individual unit, the agent, is distinct from the macro level. This allows to do what? To study the emergence of a phenomenon from the interaction of the individuals, but a phenomenon that cannot be predicted by just some of the individuals, but allows also to study the other way around. So not only the way up, the emergence, but also how this effect, once it has emerged, can retroact on the individuals, on the level that has generated the phenomenon. And I think that this aspect is important for studying not only how a phenomenon may emerge, but also the impact that can have on the individuals, on the agents generating them. So I think that in this sense, so this is somehow to put on the table the idea that agent-based modeling can act as an interface method, and also that allows to study the emergence of a phenomenon and also the impact that it may have on the individuals, on the agents that may have generated the phenomenon.
Thank you, Giulia. So we've just seen a method that is explicitly performative to the point of becoming, as you said, an experimental in silico lab. You're not only you're aware of it, but you pursue it with this. We can continue later on with a question about examples of performing society through your research. And then I would like to ask the same question to Elena.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Of perform in society through your research. And then I would like to ask the same question to Elena.
Of course, it's enormously important for me.
Thanks a lot.
Especially you mentioned now we have this project about algorithmic prediction, and performativity is one of the most discussed and challenging features of algorithmic prediction, because algorithmic
perform in
prediction
society through your research.
Or
And then I would like
Dominique
to ask the
Cadot
same
says,
question to
algorithm,
Elena.
of course, it's enormously important.
Therefore,
Especially you mentioned now we have this project about algorithmic prediction, and performativity is one of the most discussed and challenging features. I make just a prediction because of an example of the problem and the opportunity, but I just mentioned them. The opportunity is to think about predictive marketing. That the algorithm produce the future they are predicting is a big opportunity, because they propose the product that the customer is expected to buy to the customer, who might not have thought about it, might not have thought that the product exists. But then, if the algorithm is self-fulfilling in the prediction, you buy the product, the algorithm predicts right because it produces the future that it's predicting, because otherwise, without the intervention of the algorithm, you wouldn't have done it. So that's something that people have to consider when they program the algorithms. That's a positive self-fulfilling aspect. The negative one that everybody here knows very well is the preemptive negative effect of algorithms. That, for example, in my project we study in the case of predictive policing, because also in that case the algorithm fulfills the future it predicts, but in a way that preemptive, the idea of preemption, that reduces the possibility for all the actors involved. Of course, for the people that go in jail or by the surveillance, but also for the police themselves, because they bind their action by the prediction which reflects the future that self-produces itself. So preemption means nobody has the openness of the future as it could be without these devices. So, as I said, on the one hand, exciting and very interesting. On the other hand, I want to refer to what Noortje said, because I am asking, what is really new here? I feel there's a lot which is new. But if you think about self-fulfilling prophecies, we know that from a century, in a sense, and every sociologist knows that, many aspects, that the social reality is produced by social action, especially referring to the future. So where do we see the novelty of this aspect? And that's very much resonates with what Noortje said, because I really have the feeling that there's something really new that I want to study. And Noortje can, it's nice that she speaks after me, so correct me if I say something wrong. But I found very fascinating how she presented this performativity as a methodological strategy, as an opportunity to do something that couldn't be done with these new digital methods. And so I was wondering, I reformulated what I heard from her, and whether it's wrong or not. What can we do with digital methods that couldn't be done before? Or what can we do with digital prediction that couldn't be done with not digital form of forecast? And I was thinking about something that, for example, Katie O'Neill said, that performativity can be an opportunity to learn while you are working. So how preemption can become something, the same feature that lead to preemption can become an opportunity to update and upgrade your procedures. For example, let's take the negative case of police, for example. No? Her critique was the problem with policing, that police officers know from the beginning what they want to observe. They know the goals, they know they will arrest people, they want to reduce, to stop criminals from acting. Not necessarily reduce criminality, because if that were the goal, you can learn from the data that the algorithm tells you, not to learn which are the people who will be put under surveillance or in jail and so on, but how you can activate a community policing, intervening on people who are not criminal and maybe not become criminal. And so you change your goals, you learn what you want to reach through the help of algorithms. So in this, that's how I understood as an example what, in my understanding, could be what Noortje was presenting, because you can have a continuous upgrading and learning of your procedures ongoing, which is actually different. Well, so since we are talking about statistical methods, I was thinking it's different from something which is also old. So Bayesian method, if you do Bayesian statistics, you well, you change your information base according to the information you get in the course of time. But the challenge now is not only to change the information you're referring to, you change your in statistics we say your primitive question. You change the real question you are starting to explore. So you change your methodology, you change possibly the setting of your research while you're doing your research. And just a reflection about what performativity could mean in a broader sense.
Thank you. Noortje, do you want to feedback on this?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting to listen to all three of you, and maybe just try and pull at one thread, because it strikes me that we're talking about performance and performativity in slightly different ways. And this can help to clarify, I think, to identify the differences. So I think, Annalisa, to start with, you spoke about performativity as retroactive. And I think this is how performativity is often understood in science and technology studies, that somehow by performing a particular entity into being, then science sort of retroactively posits this independent reality, which actually has been, in part, is marked by scientific operations that brought it into existence. Now, I think that is quite different from the proactive performativity that we've also been discussing, where the sort of the creation or the active bringing about of particular realities is a recognized objective. And I think, for instance, predictive marketing may fit in that category. So it might be helpful for us to more precisely distinguish between these different types of performativity we're talking about, which, of course, Mackenzie and also Fabian Muñeza have done work on that, precisely that. What I think is also important in what we're discussing here, and it's delightful to hear Elena bring up the self-fulfilling prophecy, is try and sort of set up for ourselves a decision on how we want to approach this relation between prediction and performance. Because personally, I'm often inclined to make quite a sharp distinction between the two. So when I think about a performative realization of the future, I think that is different from a predictive realization of the future, in that when we look at self-fulfilling prophecies, so the Thomas's theorem that by imagining a situation as real, that reality can be brought about, those kind of notions are all about the interactions between ideas and action. So these notions of the self-fulfilling prophecy were developed in a sort of post-Weberian, Max Weber-informed sociology, where what we take seriously is the orientation of action towards the ideas that others might have about our actions. So it's through the interaction between actions and understandings that then a reality gets realized. Well, my understanding is that in the predictive claims as they are put forward in marketing, we're in a behavioral repertoire where the idea is that we can extrapolate from current behavior to future behavior. So this passage through understanding, that actors will adjust their actions based on their understanding of their actions. I'm not sure how seriously that's taken within that kind of behavioral framework. And then just as a last point, I thought that Elena's comment on sort of performativity as learning and the kind of dynamic specification of our categories by studying these kind of processes of performative realization as a process, I felt it was a very interesting response to Giulia's presentation of agent-based modeling and simulations, because I do get the sense that this kind of participatory turn in simulation and agent-based modeling can really bring these kind of performative dynamics within the space of simulation, which then also maybe complicates the somewhat rigid distinction, as I just set it up, between sort of interpretive and predictive modes, or performative and predictive.
Thanks a lot for your specifications, Noortje. I would like to go back to Giulia at this point. Maybe you, I don't want to be in evidence, but okay. I don't know exactly what's happening right now on Teams. That someone is sharing the screen, and therefore we have moved. Sorry?
It was before.
I can still see it, but okay. So, Giulia, how would you, do you have any reaction to this suggestion by Noortje?
Okay, yes, thank you. Yes, I think that the last point that was made both by Elena and by Noortje was very interesting. So this idea of performativity as learning, and I think is exactly what can be done through agent-based modeling and the interventions that can be tested. And if I may, I think I also can provide an example that is a more concrete example of how this performativity as learning was somehow expressed in my research. So let me. Shall I share my screen, Annalisa?
I think you're already sharing it. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I will briefly present the results of some simulation results that I have recently conducted with some colleagues that were aimed to test the effect of a set of policies on recruitment to terrorism. Because what I want to discuss is the way in which they have impacted criminologists and informed their way of conceiving policies to reduce recruitment to terrorism, that I think is strictly related to what both Noortje and Elena was mentioning as performativity as learning. So this model has been, as I said, developed in close collaboration with criminologists and with domain experts, with this idea of participatory modeling. And the goal of this model is that of studying radicalization and recruitment in a simulated environment, and to study also the change in key opinion-related risk and protective factors, like institutional trust, relative deprivation, and integration, that are factors that have been identified through meta-studies and through the help of domain experts as key factors that can lead people to join terrorist groups, but can also prevent them to do that. And then we have built this model, and then we have tested the effect of different policy interventions on radicalization and recruitment. So this is a snapshot of the model, and this model represents a neighborhood of a major European city. In particular, this model has been informed with data from Neukölln, that is an area of Berlin, where agents can move. They have different activities during the day. So if they are employed, for example, they can travel and work and stay there for 6-8 hours. Otherwise, if they don't work, they can go to the park, they can go to the cafe, where they socialize with others, placed in the same location. And socialization is modeled as opinion dynamics. So agents have some opinions with different strengths. And over time, the cumulative effect of the social interactions can lead to changes in the opinion of agents, affecting the overall risk of radicalization and recruitment into terrorism. So this model incorporates established theories in criminology, like routine activities, differential association theory, and opinion dynamics, and assume them as the core of the interaction among agents. So we have then built this model And then we have tested the relative effect of 3 different policies that have been selected through the help of domain experts and policymakers. The first policy is that of increasing the number of community workers at community centers. The second was a policy aimed to increase the number of community-oriented policing, so policemen that were also able to talk to people and convince them and feel them integrated in the community. And the last policy intervention was employment program for a high-risk agent, so to provide a job to people that were considered at a high risk of radicalization and recruitment. So then we have let these simulations run, and the results were the following. So the community worker intervention have shown to be a strong effect on radicalization. So it's the fact that they have strong belief about a very strong radicalized belief, but very little impact on recruitment itself. The second intervention, that was the community policing intervention, influenced attitudes towards legitimacy, so they perceive the institutions are more legitimate, but again show no effect on recruitment itself. The third type of intervention, that was that of increasing the number of employment, the rate of employment for high-risk people, had a strong and significant impact on recruitment, but little impact on radicalization. So these results somehow were important because they put into question the effectiveness of existing programs to reduce recruitment to terrorism that are largely based on de-radicalization. So what they suggest is that it's important to focus attention on the opportunity reduction. So the opportunity reduction, for example, that has been put in place through the employment intervention, in which people they stay out of their neighborhood and they work for a certain amount of hours. Especially if they are interested, this is important, especially if policymakers are interested in short-term impacts. At the same time, the results also point to the importance of de-radicalization programs for reducing the radical attitudes in society, and these can have important long-term impacts. So these results for policymakers and for domain experts were important for understanding the relative effect of these policies on short-term and long-term impact. And this way, I think we can consider agent-based modeling as a methodology that can have this aspect of performativity as learning.
Thank you, Chiara. Giulia, for the brilliant example. I think Elena has something to add.
If you have time, I will.
Yeah, we do.
Go on performativity. It's such an interesting topic, I think. No? But I think Giulia's example is perfect for that. And also, but I was also referring to Noortje's comment on understanding of performativity, and I think she's absolutely right. We need a deeper reflection how we understand performativity, how it is used in the debate, because there are many often exciting but different understanding of performativity circulating, and she was exposing right. I completely agree with you. But I would ask Noortje to ask you a question about the point, to be sure that I understood it right, about the relationship between performativity of prediction and the classical idea of self-fulfilling prophecy. You're right. There's one way to understand it that sort of refers, you said, to the idea of intention and understanding and the behavior of an actor. So that the expectation, the prophecy, what the prediction affects what people expect from the world and so on, which is definitely different from the way we understand performativity now, even if it's connected. But I thought there's another aspect that was still observed before the digital turn in how prediction changed the world. And this partly independent of the interpretation and the meaning of the actors. And this refers to the simple fact that also before digital procedures, predictions are facts. It basically connects to Austin's idea of performativity, that words are facts, something that happens in the world, and as such have consequences independent of what the people producing them had in mind. I just mentioned an example that everybody knows. The reason why in Italy, like in most countries, you are not allowed to share electoral predictions in the day of the elections. Before the prediction itself, independent of how you understand it, is a fact. It affects the behavior of voters and is affecting the world, changing the word the prediction is expected to predict and so on, in a way that we have to consider for the very practical consequences. And again, that is something that is related to the way digital prediction, concretely changes the world. But, I think there's something still different that we want to explore. There are exactly how. And on this, I think that Noortje's proposal about the digital method is exciting. So I disagree with you to say that I agree with you.
Yeah, Annalisa, it's a brief reply. Is there time for that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, because I think we might be through the contributions of the three of us get to a way we can put or define this difference, because I feel, Elena, that you're speaking about two different topics, and I'm simplifying the difference to make it clear. So that on the one hand, we can talk about different predictive methods and methodologies and their role in bringing about certain realities. So we can look at, what's the role of modeling, for instance, in bringing about a particular reality, for instance, lockdown. And what we're talking about there is a kind of performativity of method. So we're not just talking about the instrumental sort of relevance that once the policymakers have the model, they can do stuff that they couldn't do when they didn't have the model. We're also talking about their particular assumptions in the model that perhaps aren't acknowledged, that nevertheless direct attention to particular solutions, for instance, behavioral distancing. So that's the kind of the performativity of method, and different predictive methodologies do that differently. And I think there it's really important to make a separation also between the stated purpose of a method and the practical effects of a method. So I personally think that behavioral marketing does not do what it claims to do. So I don't believe that future behavior can be extrapolated from current behavior, because I'm too much of a Weberian to believe that. However, we're also talking about something else. So we're not only talking about the performativity of method and the role of method, predictive method. We're also talking about what are the kinds of interactions that are possible between methods, users, scientists, data sources. And I think when we're talking about that, we're talking about something different. We're talking about what I think Ian Hacking very helpfully draws attention to when he talks about interactive kinds. So that, for instance, when you're a woman refugee and you're labeled as a woman refugee, that opens up different courses of action for you as a woman refugee, and also different self-understandings. And I think that kind of interactivity, so the question, how do methods interact with subjects, and perhaps also how do they interact with data in situations, like that's a different way of approaching performativity. So I think, and I think also when we talk about agent-based modeling, we get a very different perspective if we talk about, how does the model equip the policymakers to intervene, or what are the assumptions built onto the model? That's a very different question from the question, how does the model enable interaction, for instance, with participants in participatory model? So separating that out, I think, is very, very important.
Thank you. Any further reaction to this? Giulia? Any? So thanks for, let's say, separating these three functions, let's say, of methods, which I think it brings to the second question I wanted to ask you. This performative character of methods, or at least I would say the second, the third, according to your classification, Noortje, or especially the third, it entails that much happens at the intersection between social research and social action. We know that tomorrow we will deal more explicitly with interventions, but they are deeply linked to what we have just discussed about enacting populations. And I would start from you in this case, Noortje, because also in your book, Digital Sociology, you make a claim that digital ways of knowing and intervening in society are usually too narrowly focused or framed as ethical and political, and not so often methodological, ontological, and epistemic. And I think this is worth, well, first to hear about it from your own words, and then it might be the topic of our roundtable for the next minutes. Especially also here in Italy, there is a tendency also to look at the ethical and especially political consequences of performative methods. So I'm very curious to know more about the methodological, ontological, and epistemic actually implications that you see in digital methods.
Yeah, Annalisa, I cannot see you, so you need to interrupt me if I should stop. Yeah? Okay, I'll start and then I'll keep an eye on you. I can see you now, Annalisa. So, okay, so one of, we're having interactive.
The screen in the previous frame.
Yeah, I can see you now. So wave, and then I can see you now. So that's better. So one of the things I find really interesting about how you framed today's and tomorrow's event is by bringing into contact digital methods with the question of the population, because I think digital methods, perhaps partly because of the Dutch context in which it develops, there is a kind of a latent participatory orientation in that method, in digital methods. So it's often set up as a collaborative method, as an engaged method. So enabling, for instance, academics to work together with civil society organizations on specific issues of concern. But that question of participation in method and participatory research is, it sits uncomfortably with this question of digital methods as instruments for the governance of populations. And I think you're right to bring those two very different sort of imaginaries of digital method, or different approaches to digital methods, into contact. Because I think one of the things that's increasingly clear, like as sort of the government as platform develops more and more, is that these digital methods have this double functionality, if you want, for sort of enacting a public, composing a public, enabling public modes of engagement. And I think the comments we heard this morning about demonstration were very relevant to that. And at the same time, these very same technologies and assemblages and digital arrangements are used as systems for the governance of population, where this question of control all the time comes in, as Elena, I think, pointed out very clearly, with this ambiguity. Is it about control or is it about participation? What is going on? Now, that ambiguity, what I also took from Elena's remark is that that can be interpreted as a governance strategy. You know, it's quite convenient that these participatory methods also have these affordances for control. And so that makes it really important to do, I think, what Annalisa asks us to do, which is to bring these, to think these different aspects together, to see what are the research frames that allows us to get to that ambiguity. And Celia Lurie has been working on a project with Martin Tironi in Chile on personalization as prediction. Well, you know, whether that phrase is one that could be discussed, but what they do in that project is they analyze app ecologies as being simultaneously systems for the governance of a population and a system for assembling a kind of a public. And I think that confluence is like super uncomfortable, but super important to work on. So yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a general level comment I make, but I hope it connects with the question as you raised it, Annalisa.
Thank you, Noortje. Giulia, did you have the opportunity to reflect on whether in using your own method, talking about ethical and political implications is enough, or you see also the possibilities to foresee epistemological and ontological consequences in your research?
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. It's a super important question, I think, and in one of the talks before, I think I think it was in Noortje keynote speech. There was a point that I think was really relevant for this. So the fact that there are some biases that the social media, for example, are creating, and I'm thinking, for example, about the fact that the social media seem to, and there is evidence for that, to create a debate that is polarized. It's polarized because of the structure of the social media, and so what is going on there and what has been studied so far is the idea that groups tend to stay together because of homophily. This is one perspective that has been put on the table, right? So there are these echo chambers that can be created and generated in which there are ideas that can be good or bad ideas that stay there and are polarized and make the debate polarized because people tend to stay together, right? People that are similar. This is one perspective. And I think that is not the entire story, because there is also, I think that it's not entirely true that people tend to stay together just because they want to stay together. It's also the fact that the social media tend to create a distorted perception of the majority. So a voice that can be a voice of a minority, maybe a group of committed individuals, committed people that want to voice a lot because they have the energy to voice a lot, can set the perception that is the opinion of the majority, and this is because of the structure of the social media. So a small minority can set the opinion of the majority just because of the structure, and this is somehow creating problems for the debate on digital platforms, because there are ideas of small groups that at the end tend to be considered as the opinion of the majority just because of the structure of the social media. So in this sense, I think that it's very important also to see how then these digital methods are also somehow creating some biases and also distorting reality in a way that can have some important consequences, because they somehow do not allow also minorities to voice, and they not allow people to have the right opinion or the right perception of what is going on just because of the structure. So that's, I don't know whether I answered your point, but this was something that...
It seems to me you're somehow saying that what you call biases, it's first of all an epistemological problem, so a problem of how knowledge is created that then has political repercussions.
Exactly. So the structure of the social media is distorting the perception. That is an epistemological problem that at the end has political consequences, because only some opinions are represented, and they also are considered as the opinion of the majority, but this is not true. It's just that it's a distorted perception that is somehow set by the technology.
Thanks. Elena.
Well, let me be very, very quick, because you already said everything, and I agree very much what has been said. Maybe I just add something about my experience, how the debate, as you and Noortje said, about about digital methods often were narrowly framed as ethical and political. So as much as excited as critical media studies are, because there are so many interesting things to read and to talk about, I have to confess sometimes when I read an article claiming that the algorithms are biased, I don't go any more further, because we know it already. It's a big problem, it's important, but it's so repetitive that sometimes the research just to put on that, because to focus on that. Not because it's not important, of course, but I think that we shift attention to other issues. We can go back even to, as Giulia said, even to the debate about bias from a less repetitive perspective, and integrate with other points. For example, like we are discussing this morning, that a consequence of that are some structured idea of understanding our society. I understood the debate this morning partly about how separating the discussion about public opinion that we have still Habermas tradition we have from this debate about publics in plural, which is something which also came before digital methods, but now we have much more empirical material to discuss about it, and that I think is really refreshing and interesting, and also a way to use echo chambers and filter bubbles, which are great concepts, but not always. I think there's much more to do than just clean. Of course we have filter bubbles. We also have echo chambers, sure. And that's a starting point, not the end of the research. Not just you observe that and that's the end. I just want to mention just one more, since Noortje mentioned epistemological issues connected with that. I think in social science we really should take seriously the challenge of the distinction between correlation and causation, which is up to now discussed mostly by philosophers. And there's interesting debate on that. But I think social sciences should have something to say about that, which is a deeply epistemological issue. But I mean, causality has always played a big role for sociology. And what does it mean now that correlation can do it? Well, I don't have to describe the issue.
But that makes me think at, let's say, the distribution of tasks, so from a sociological perspective. So if we talk about correlation, or if you use a statistical analysis, then we have some figures who are endowed with taking care of that. So statisticians. On the other hand, talking about delegating, and so talking about causation in a way that Meyer and Schomberger do, for example. It makes other actors pop in, maybe not human actors. So there are actually different delegations of roles and of tasks between social actors, being them humans or non-humans, when you talk about causation and you talk about correlation. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's the point. Well, oversimplifying, we know that algorithm can find a lot of correlation and don't find causation. But they often don't need causation. or for my topic work about prediction. In many cases, when you look for prediction, you don't need necessarily causation. Correlation in many cases are enough, which is not enough. I'm not claiming any Chris Anderson theory, not at all. I was just thinking, just to say, division of tasks. If you really have to do predictions, you don't always need causation. And we are used to think of prediction only, reliable prediction must be based on a plausible causation, which made a lot of sense until now. But as with digital methods, we can other way to control the reliability of the correlation for predictive tasks, which offer almost nothing to scientists, but offers a lot to predictive, practical purposes, something like that.
Okay, then, Noortje, you have a. Giulia, maybe it's you sharing your screen. Could you? I think it pops up automatically. But we have multiple mise en abîme, multiple nested pictures. Noortje?
Yeah, so two comments. So in relation to Giulia's point of the biases of social media and the way it biases public opinion now, I think quite clearly and noticeably, it's a machine for biasing opinion. I do think there's a really big, there is a kind of a mystery. It's not really a mystery, but I think we need to start by seeing it as a mystery, which is that even as everywhere all the time we are reminded about the algorithms being biased and the media platforms producing bias and aggravating bias, at the same time, the representational framework for computational science seems to me stronger than it's ever been, at least in my lifetime. So there's a very strange sort of confluence where this computational architecture in society is perpetually shown to be producing all these artifacts. So to not be a faithful representation of, for instance, public opinion, but creating all these opinion artifacts, while at the same time the trust that computational methods and the analysis of the data generated through these systems, that this is the way to represent social reality, that representational framework is just stronger and stronger. And I find that genuinely really weird. Like the only explanation that I have is just a collectively cultivated blind spot for performativity. That, we don't want to know that same system which allows us to know the world produces the effects that, make that world in part. So it's another reason why I think the framing for today is so important. And I also hope that the types of quite technical issues that Elena was discussing about the status of correlation for causation, that they are so crucial because they are a way of, moving precisely into that blind spot area and get precise on that. Because, the kind of end of theory phase where correlation was understood inductively, we know that's wrong because these correlational data machines, they produce categories, they produce clusters, but the sort of modeling centric epistemologies that a lot of AI debate push in the foreground, the kind of deductive assumptions that we sometimes find there, as in, we now have the model that can do it all, as if somehow in that theoretical construct, now all this knowledge is encoded. Now, we know both of those, the inductive and this deductive coding of computational method is flawed. So I think this kind of specifying the correlational methodology in a way that really takes seriously the kind of conceptual operations or calculative operation of data, like how is that process generative of categories or of, like, that's just, I really, yeah, I do agree, or I think that is really, that's where if we can produce clarity on that point, we might get some progress on that blind spot issue, perhaps not in society, but at least in some places.
Thank you. Giulia, do you want to comment?
I think so. I tend to really agree on this very last point, both by Elena and Noortje. So I think that the way to go is to have an integration between these deductive and inductive approaches, right? So, but also these deductive approaches, I agree that there is this tendency of having the ambition to create one single model that can explain everything, right? And this is also something that can be, of course, dangerous. That's why I think that informing these models, both with theory, but also anchoring this model to data, and to develop these models in a iterative process with domain experts, that's also the way to go, because this allows to have models that are more specific, so there are not models that they have the ambition to explain everything, but at least can provide some explanation of why certain phenomena, certain patterns emerge, and not just describe that they are there, because otherwise we have only these the possibility of describing reality, though there are some patterns, there are some regularities, but then we don't understand why those regularities are there. It's true that maybe we don't need to know that, but if we want to generalize the results and try to apply these results to other domains, it's important that we understand the causes, the mechanisms that have generated those phenomena. So the way to go, I completely agree, is that of integrating these two directions, right? It's not clear how to do that, because also this huge amount of data coming from the big data science, the data science, is not easy then to incorporate and to have models that can really talk to these large amount of data. But that's I think that's I completely agree that that's the way to go.
Thank you. That reminds me that Charles Sanders Peirce found a word for that was abduction. But I think it's time now to open to the ground to the audience. So we have a question by David. You can just talk like this.
Right. I got that there's a mic there. Yeah, but it's not a question I had long been thinking about. It was really just from this last juncture where I think Noortje said something about big data models that try to explain everything, and Giulia, you followed that up on it. And I'm not a contributor to that debate. I'm a consumer of it, but to the extent that I get it, I don't read people who are saying we want to try to explain everything. They just say we want to try to predict something. They don't try to explain anything. They don't try to explain everything. They don't try to explain anything at all. They just want to try to predict something. So did I miss something in this debate? Maybe I missed the people who are trying to explain everything, but who are they? I've never read them.
I think what we're talking about is how performativity can be taken seriously as a methodological challenge. So when when we had the big data emergent categorization phase, which I think we've moved beyond, the end of theory phase, the kind of empiricist coding of correlation meant, I think, that there wasn't much engagement with performativity. But if you perhaps a bit simplistically, well, but not really simplistically. If you look at contemporary debates about the deployment of machine learning in social science, what I hear quite a bit is this kind of this confidence that social reality can be modeled in the same way that biological and natural physical realities can be modeled, and that the task is to get the models that perform at that task well. And what I think we're talking about is, in both those approaches, there is, I think it's fair to say, a sort of lack of interest, and the strong claim is a kind of a blind spot for performativity as something that happens inside the methodological frame. And that one of the things that are interesting about, for instance, engaging with abduction and peers and those kind of abductive methodology that focus on the interaction between data, models, that we're working on that problem of the blind spot for performativity as a methodological challenge. So, and I don't want to just blanket sort of judge scientists for being silly, like that would be, I mean, these are extremely smart people, but it's about what is their methodological strategy and what's the problem with it.
Elena, do you want to reply to David as well?
Well, I'm rather on the predicting without explain trend, so I would agree with that. But no, if I'm, I would think about Noortje's performativity blind spot, which again puzzles me, because I think I agree. But again, I mean, Heisenberg was 1 century ago, and performativity, and it was in physics. So it's not social sciences without big data. I mean, you are right. We definitely have a performativity-wise blind spot. But why should it change now if the knowledge that observation affects the world observed already circulates even the hard sciences since 1 century? Maybe we see now more how we cannot ignore it, because, but yeah.
Giulia, what from the field, what do you think that we see that more now, that we are more sensitive to it? You're muted.
Okay, sorry. So also in my experience with modeling, there is the tendency, and also I've done work in which there are some, so there is this idea of trying to find mechanisms that can explain many different phenomena. And this may be interesting. I'm also fascinated by this approach, but I also think that when doing, for example, when doing agent-based modeling of some specific phenomena, then you really need to have a model with specific rules. And this was, I learned it through my interaction with domain experts. So they were very unsatisfied with general models that they could explain everything from the plant to the human. That maybe it's interesting because can be fascinating from other scientific purposes, but for them was really not informative. So I also moved beyond that tendency of having very general models, and I tried to have models that are more specific and try to capture aspects of that specific reality. Maybe that model cannot be applied to everything, but at least they try to explain one single phenomenon in detail. And it was mainly my interaction with domain experts and policymakers that made me understand how important it is to specify the model and to have models that can explain a part of the reality. So in this sense, I'm with Noortje that it's important to have both aspects, but also that the model should be somehow specific and not too much general.
Thank you. So other questions from the other participants? Please raise your hand.
If I could stay 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay. So following Giulia there, now I think I see a distinction, and it goes back to Noortje, that the problem might not be that there are models that try to explain everything, but what are the utility or the futility of models that are meant to be applied to everything? There's a difference, you know.
That's very good.
Try to explain everything, but you say, I have a model and it applies everywhere. Like I see that in my field, Barabashi there in the northeastern and in Hungary, has a, these guys write these wonderful network analytic studies, and they are about everything, from the stars to the insects to the behavior of college students to the behavior of politicians to you name it. It can apply absolutely everywhere, but they don't try to explain everything. And so I think maybe I was mistaken to be too quick, challenging Noortje there, because I am also annoyed by those kinds of models too. No. But maybe there's something interesting in general models that we shouldn't just throw them away too much. Sometimes there are some insights.
But there's something loosely connected with that, and connected again to something very insightful that Noortje said before. Noortje, again, tell me if I misinterpret you, because not exactly what you said, but I understood what you said, and I connect what they said, as we should reconceptualize, also rethink the idea of bias, because in the way you use bias is a general condition of every every theory or every approach that acknowledges its situation condition, which is everything. That goes in the direction, I think, what David was saying, because if you don't claim that the theory to be acceptable should be general, which we tend implicitly often to from Enlightenment tradition to assume, and say, well, actually, by theory refers to what I'm referring to, it is actually biased. And biased in this sense is not something negative, which is completely deviates from the everyday usage, of course. But to say biased, if you say I'm biased, it means I'm aware of the condition I refer to, and I make explicit for you, for myself, and for the others, and that's what I have to offer. Every theory is biased. As we say now, a theory is situated, and we have no problem with that. But actually, if I understand Noortje correct, we could also say every theory is biased, and that's unavoidable, and that's how it is.
Okay, I'm asking other questions from the participants. Please raise your hand. Yeah, we have Georgios Glouftios.
Yes,
Please.
hello.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for these very interesting discussions. I would like to ask a question about politics and what is the place of politics when it comes to performativity. Because you discussed a bit about that methods are performative in the sense that they produce specific realities. But different methods may produce different realities. So I was wondering whether there are any instances of conflicting or conflicting realities or controversies when it comes to different methods. And then the second question has to do with the subject or the population that gets performed. So let's say that we have methods that produce knowledge about a specific population and thus perform this population in specific ways. I was wondering whether populations or individual subjects have any sort of agency in this context. In the sense, can populations or individual subjects in a way contest performances? Okay.
Noortje?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I think it also connects with what we have been discussing, because one of the problems that I have with the population as a category, that I have a kind of a habit of thought that I think public is an active agency. So when actors are assembled into a public, they are organized as a collective that is capable, that has agency. While with a population, when actors are organized into a population, they're first and foremost passive. They are the object of a coordination mechanism or of a governance initiative. But I think that actually that is not always helpful to set it up like that. I think the presentation we heard this morning, for instance, from Claudio, of the way in which demonstration and self-demonstration was like a crucial device in the management of the pandemic. That is, self-demonstration is a very active sort of register in which to operate. Yet in his presentation, I think he made clear it was very much a device for organizing the population. And so, yeah, I think that is really, it's sort of, we're forced to think anew. We cannot automatically say, oh, when a population is modeled, that will render that population passive. Or if actors are invited to offer a self-demonstration, that will constitute them as a public. So I think part of what we're talking about is the difficulty that we cannot just look at the method and then decide, oh, this is how it configures subjects or equips them. And that's also something I've really learned, I think, from Giulia's contributions, that modeling, when it is deployed as, for instance, in interaction with domain experts, it's a highly active participatory methodology. So we cannot just say, oh, modeling renders actors passive or something when they're the object of modeling. Like that kind of sort of straightforward linking of the method to the effect, we can't do it. Yeah. And just a very quick point on the bias, is that okay, Annalisa? Yeah. That I've burned my fingers on by saying we shouldn't be against bias. So I think I've got into trouble by saying that. So I think I've stopped saying it. So, but one of the ways of thinking of bias that I really like is when you have polarization methods in data science. So where you have a data set and you detect what is the leaning. So if you, for instance, have Democrat and Republican, you have a data set of books bought on Amazon, and you can ask, how polarized is this data set? How much does it lean towards Republican books being bought on Amazon, or how much does it lean to Democratic books being bought on Amazon? Now there, like, bias is not something you're for or against. It's a kind of, it's like the opposite of neutral. So you can have a more neutral distribution, or you can have a biased distribution. And so bias is in a way the opposite of indeterminate. And yeah, if we could be in a world where that would be what bias mean, that would be pretty amazing. But yeah.
Okay. Interesting insight. Thank you. I don't know whether Giulia or Elena want to reply to Georgios' question, or. No. And if we look, are there any further question from the participants? No? Okay. So I suggest that we keep this 5 minutes to. No, sorry. There is one question, Tim. please. We can't hear you.
Let's see if this
goes
any. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. Just a follow-up to Giorgio's question as well. I think one of the challenges we're facing right now, and I'll speak a bit about that tomorrow, is that one of the issues we may be facing is not so much that people can't contest the performativities if it comes, for example, to COVID vaccination, which I'll be addressing, but the problem is that they can very well, and there's a continuous process of anticipating how performativities might be contested and what kind of performative effects a certain performativity might have that makes it counter-performative. So I think that's one of the shifts in the politics that we end up in if we try to make it a very, very active form of being part of the performativity of these methods, more intervention-oriented, that you also start to realize the problems of contestations of such performativities. So I just wanted to, because it's a common question and one I very much resonate with, but I'm also experiencing it quite differently at the moment. So I just wanted to, mention that.
So more as an answer itself to Georgios, I would say.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
No, exactly. So that it was indeed an answer to Georgios' question, or a reflection on it. I'm so familiar with the question.
Yeah.
But in the collective project we're having, I see so many actors having such a different problem.
Can you make an example? We still have 1 minute to go.
Yeah, well, it's the continuous question that if you include a certain aspect in guidance on COVID vaccination, that could easily be taken up in a way that it gets contested that reduces vaccination readiness at the population level very much. So I think also there may be actually some value in maintaining some of the distinctions, but I have to think about it. I have a whole night, so that's good. That Noortje just made between this working at the publics and populations interface, because I'm also, again, much more familiar with and connected to the notions of a public as something that's actively performed and thereby implied and inherently then has some possibilities, or should have. And at population levels, this is not always the case, but maybe it's also not always a very helpful thing to have. For example, if you're trying to get to some version of a population effect, as is the case of COVID vaccination.
Yeah. Okay,
sorry, I'll be much clearer tomorrow.
Looking forward to it. So I would suggest, well, first of all, a big thanks to Noortje, Giulia, and Elena. I really enjoyed this exchange. It was a bit unruly, but I think it worked better this way than just having a set of questions. And we have 15 minutes break now, 15. And we meet at 4:30 for the launch of the Ontology Explorer that will probably also provide a concrete example of many of the topics that we addressed today. And as I recall this morning, don't forget that after the launch, we will have bring your drinks. Unfortunately, we couldn't provide for them, but we have a 3D interactive space where we can have the easy talk that usually makes conferences even more interesting. So you have time now to get your drinks. See you in 15 minutes.
Thank you.